Well, everybody, I'd like to welcome Steve Beauchesne from Beau's. He's the co-founder to Beers with Bill. Tonight, like I said, we'll be starting off with Country Vibe. And please welcome Steve and take it away, Steve.
Hey, everybody. I see Keith Carmen's name there, too. Hey, Keith.
Congratulations.
Hey, thanks. He's saying congratulations. I just welcomed the brand new baby girl into the world about a week ago. So I have not slept much. So I apologize in advance if I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about today. At least I have a good excuse, right? Yeah, so like Bill said, my dad and I started Beau's All Natural Brewing Company back in 2006. It's been, I guess, a 14 and a bit year run so far, and lots has changed in the beer world, and lots of changes just in general over the last 14 years. And I'm happy to say I'm still having fun with the brewery, and kind of every year's got a new challenge and a new opportunity and something else to try from somebody else. That's always been exciting too. So like Bill said, we're gonna start today with the Country Vibes. Country Vibes, we're calling a amber lagered ale. So that's the can for all you folks. From I guess a bit of a background and context piece. How do I put this? We decided we wanted to make this beer because we read an article that said amber beers were passé and no one was making them anymore. And we thought, well, shoot, that sounds like the perfect time for us to make one then. And so we decided to launch a beer in a category that was, I think, in double-digit decline, just to, I guess, prove that we could. Stylistically, lagered ale is actually it's a made-up term. When we first launched Lugtread back in 2006. We didn't want to call it a Kolsch because I'm not sure if everyone here would know, but Kolsch is it's a style of beer from the Rhinelands in Germany, and it's actually what I believe the only beer that has an appellation to it. So technically, you're not supposed to call it a Kolsch if it's not brewed in Cologne or at least in that part of the Rhinelands. And so out of respect for the Kolsch convention, when we named Lugtread, we gave it a very literal name. So Lugtread is an ale. It uses an ale yeast, which gives the beer some light fruitiness. But then we age it the way that you would age a lager. So much longer aging time at much colder temperatures. And the name really stuck, and so now there's probably 40, 50 breweries that have a beer that they call lagered ale. And so we thought, well, I guess we might as well. It's time to lean in to this this name that we came up with. There's an interesting cousin to the Kolsch style of beer known as an Alt. Alt is German for old, and it's brewed in the other part of the Rhinelands, the Dusseldorf area, and in many respects it's very much a cousin to a Kolsch or a beer like Lugtread, where it's got very similar kind of ale yeast and lagering technique. But one of the principal differences between the two beers is that with a alt beer, you use a more caramel malt. So the beer ends up with a reddish hue, and you get kind of more of a pronounced maltiness. Typically, alts also have a bit more bitterness as well. So you it's a bit more amped up. And with Country Vibes, because it is an amber lagered ale. We decided we wouldn't be too strict on an interpretation of an alt, so we weren't trying necessarily to mirror an alt. And for those of you that have had our beers for a while, you might know that we do already in our back catalog have a seasonal beer that we call Festive Ale. That's also an alt. So we wanted to make sure this was a little bit different flavor-wise, and wanted to make sure that we still kind of kept in keeping with the idea of a lagered ale, but a little bit wanted to make sure that it stood apart from others that were similar. So from a kind of statistic perspective, Country Vibes is 4.7% alcohol. I saw in the chats it's a little bit too hoppy for someone there. It is 27 IBUs, so it's not over the top like a big IPA or anything, but there's enough hops in there to kind of provide that kind of nice backbone. From a sort of FG, if you care much about sort of your residual sugars, you're at about a 2.5, so fairly low, which makes it a very dry beer. Your hops in here are organic Racao, and malt base is a lot of Pilsner malts, some Cara Munich malts, and some Cara Roma malts as well. And we use the same German ale yeast that we use for our lug tread with this beer. And with that, I've talked a lot. Now it's time to try it. Bill, do you want me to keep talking about this beer a little bit more?
This is your time. You talk about
It's
what you
all
want.
me, eh? Okay.
You stop talking. I'm just going to ask a question.
There you go. Okay, just a couple kind of other things. In the tasting of this beer, for me the malts really shine. So it's I guess a little bit unique in today's world where everything's about the hops. This beer is really about the malts and kind of that wonderful kind of toasty caramel malts. They're all German malts in here as well, and it's kind of gives it the way that you got that big sweetness up front, but a dry finish. I really like the way that plays. It kind of gets that chewiness to it. The hops in there are kind of evenly balanced between aroma and bitterness, so that you do end up with enough of a hop aroma that you can it's there, but it's really not supposed to dominate in this beer. From a food pairing perspective, this is it's because it's such a sessionable beer, it's got a lot of versatility to it. Pizza, I think it goes great with this beer. You can easily pair this with kind of your standard pub food. A hamburger would go really well with this. Our brewmaster actually suggested Chicago mixed popcorn, which I thought was great. Anything salty really is going to go well with this, I think. And I think that's probably the basics behind this beer.
Now, Steve, would you call this a malt forward beer?
Yes, I would. Yeah,
that's the
malt
style I love. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of between sort of malts, hops, and yeast. It's definitely the malts take the center stage with this beer, and it's interesting because it's only 4.7% alcohol. So quite often your malt forward beers are also very high in alcohol because it's the amount of malt you put in increases the sugar. So it's one of the challenges to make a beer that really still is chewy thick and has that malt punch behind it, or that malt backbone, without kind of getting into a beer that ends up being 7 or 8% alcohol.
Yeah, this is wonderful. It's like I said, it's the style that it's the kind of beer I like to just sit and savor. So
Yeah, and what's kind of fun about it is it is, so retro at this point. Back in the '90s, this was every brewery's staple beer, and in the 2000s, it was still everywhere. But it became such an oversaturated style that pretty much everybody that opened up in the last 5 years was like, yeah, I'm not gonna bother with an amber. I'm just gonna, put out something that's really hoppy. So by having this beer and bringing it out in, late 2019, or actually this was early 2020, wasn't it? I think it's only been out since February. Um, uh, by doing that sort of, within the last year, it's kind of it's. I always love it when we get to zag when everyone else is zigging.
yeah, it's an interesting thing, which would bring me to the question that I would have asked her later on. The background in biz school,
Mhm.
and you do a lot of the things that biz school would tell you to do when you decided to start Beau's. You did a lot of market research, you did a lot of brewery research, talked to everybody. Even as you were going through your accelerated growth period, you did all those right things. But you guys have been a bit of a contrarian in the industry. And I was wondering
Mhm.
what drives that attitude to do things differently.
Yeah, so I guess it comes from a couple different places, but uh, I think it's either in your blood or it isn't. I'm an old school punk rocker, and kind of following the mainstream's never been something that I did. And I think the other side is the business side of this would kind of also tell you that when everybody else is going one direction, it's usually not the best way to stand out in a crowd is to follow them. So um, it tends to be kind of what doing what everyone else does is what you do when you run out of ideas. And it's not a winning business strategy, I don't think. And and it tends to be a strategy where it kind of it if you're a follower, you either have to be cheaper than everybody else or more aggressive than everyone else, and it's really not kind of the Beau's philosophy. You know we want to be we want to have fun with other breweries, and we want to have fun in the industry. And um, you know it's a lot simpler to create something that other people aren't making and have that stand out than to try to make another version of every beer that everyone else has had. And don't get me wrong, Bose makes IPAs. Bose makes other beers that others have made before us, and we're not claiming to have invented craft beer or anything like that. But you need to know when to follow, and you need to know when to lead, and you need to know, you need to. I really think be governed by your passions. And um, uh, back a few years ago, most of what Bose was putting out would be all seasonal offerings. And when we first started doing that, that was an awful lot of fun. And at a certain point, it started to feel like a chore. Oh shoot, we got to make another beer next month, and you could kind of feel sort of the creativity dropping in the brewery. So we took a very, uh, I would say, a bold stance for us and said, you know what, we're going to keep putting out interesting new beer, but rather than putting out 40 a year, we're going to maybe put out 8, and we're going to work really hard at those 8 instead, and only put out 8 beers that we really, really are excited about. And I think for me, this is where the business theory and the punk rock ethics actually really align well. You have to, you know, we don't have, you know, buckets full of cash. We started off with just a tiny bit of money, and everything we've done has been to reinvest back into the company. And because we're still an independent company, we've got to be very careful with how we spend our dollars. So we don't do a ton of marketing. We don't do a ton of advertising. And that means that we've got to stand out without using those you know, sort of more typical ways of getting your name out there, and that's always led us to, you know, make our beer stand out.
Jen's got a question. She was wondering, from the point of view of retro, is Kissmeyer going to return?
So Kissmeyer, it's actually never gone, but the LCBO delisted it. So we've stubbornly continued to produce that beer, but you can only get it in Quebec and at the brewery, and the occasional restaurant in Ontario will order it as well. But it's definitely fallen into obscurity. If you're so inclined to, you can order it off our website actually as well. But it's a wonderful beer, and we made that beer with Anders Kissmeyer from Denmark, who's, you know, just one of the coolest brewers you'll ever meet. And he just he has a unique way of looking at beer and thinking about beer, and making that with him was just so much fun. And we've been making it now for, geez, it must be 6-7 years at least.
One of my favorite ones to come into kickoff.
Yeah, it's just a great beer, and it's still one of our best sellers in Quebec, which is why we keep making it. I saw the chat come up. Why did it get delisted from LCBO? I think it was kind of a decision on their part to say, hey, because you make this with somebody else, we're less interested in it, I guess. At first they were super excited about it, and it was still doing relatively well in the marketplace, but maybe not as well as some of our beers. And I don't know, they just kind of gave us the notice one day, and we said, oh, okay. That was it.
I'm going to say the LCBO can be a little bit mystifying at the best of times.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a curiosity question for you.
Okay.
The decision to found Beau's happens on a patio over a beer with your dad. And then there's this 2-year process of absolutely the right thing to do. Spend some time researching the market, understand what's going on. I'm curious, what was the anticipation like during that process of planning and getting ready to launch Beau's?
Yeah, well, it was. It's not so long ago, I can't remember it, but it's funny because I don't know, human nature. You tend to forget how much anxiety there was and how much stress, and you only remember all the good parts. You remember all.
Very true.
Looking back at it, it seems like, you know, just the best time of my life. But I'm sure at the time it was full of a lot of stress and anxiety. I was still working a full-time job, so basically my day was I would get up at 4 in the morning, and I'd work till 7 on the business plan, and then I'd go work for a day, pick up my daughter at daycare, and come home, put her to bed, couple more hours on the business plan till maybe 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, grab 4 hours sleep, get up and do it all again. And every vacation day got booked into, you know, going to visit potential accounts, or, you know, visiting with LCBO and you know, government people, and So it really was all encompassing. It didn't leave a lot of time for kind of anything else in my life. But at the time there was, I think, 30 breweries in the province, and it was just such an exciting thing to be sort of opening up a brewery. And it wasn't like we were the first to do it, or that there was nobody else out there, but it was a much smaller group of breweries out there at the time. And so kind of everything to do with researching beer, or even finding a new beer on the shelves of the LCBO back in those days was just something you got really, really excited about. And looking back, it just seems like great times. But there was a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of moments where kind of the whole thing fell apart. And there was at least a couple moments where I was like, oh shit, this isn't gonna happen now. And somehow every time kind of we were on the verge of calling it quits, we'd find a way to make the next thing work out. And just little by little, we kind of got it across the finish line.
That's great. That's great. Then that's going to lead me to another question way off the beaten path of what we talked about earlier. There's a romance behind starting a brewery and being a brewmaster that precludes anyone understanding the level of frustration and anxiety and hard work that goes with that. So I would like to hear the story of your first beer.
Okay, so buckle in. So when we first opened up, I'm not sure if you all have had the opportunity to try Church Key Brewing beers, but they're a great little brewery out in Campbellford. And when we first were opening up, we lost what was supposed to be our major funder, and had to kind of rejig the business plan kind of on a moment's notice. And I'd become friends with John Graham, who's the owner of Church Key, kind of as we were getting set up. And when we found out that we weren't going to get the money that we thought we would, at least right away, I called him up and I asked if it'd be possible to brew a little bit at his place. And kind of in true Beau's fashion, we said we didn't want to do contract brewing. What we wanted to do was install our own fermenters and rent the brew house, which is what we ended up doing. So we bought our own fermenters, our own glycol chiller, and we installed it all at the place. 'Cause one of the things that's interesting about Church Key, they don't chill any of their beer while it's aging. They treat it like true ales. So they've got a cold room that's just for packaging, basically. And because Lugtread, the design of that beer required it to age like a lager, we had to install the whole glycol system, the tanks, the whole thing. And we'd rent out the brewery from them a couple days a month, and we'd all drive out to Campbellford, and we'd put in these like 20-hour days where you'd just brew, and then the next day I guess the first batch you didn't have anything else to do, but the month after that it's like you're trying to package one and brew right back into the tank right after. So these epic long days. But the very first batch, the installers of the glycol system somehow reversed the solenoid or something, and that first batch of beer, one of the cooling jackets on the fermenter, when the beer had gotten to 0 degrees and it was supposed to send the signal to turn off the glycol, it didn't. And so it just kept chilling this beer. And the day that we launched, we'd had a number of delays with the project. And so we'd booked this press conference in Ottawa. And we needed the beer that day for it. So Matt and Jamie were at the brewery. They kegged off the very first keg. Jamie got in the truck and started driving it out to Ottawa to make it to this press conference. And so the beer gets to the press conference. Pour what's literally going to be my first taste of lug tread on I think it was CTV, had the cameras rolling, and I took a sip, and this isn't the beer we were supposed to make. It was delicious, but instead of being 5.2% crisp, refreshing, and subtle, this was a monster of a beer. We found out afterwards what had happened was that glycol through the system had frozen about a third of the batch. And so we super concentrated the remaining beer. And so what I was drinking was this absolutely delicious, but absolutely not what we expected beer. And kind of had to just roll with it. The good news was we only had 7 restaurants that had agreed to sell our beer. So, by the next morning, we'd printed out little flyers that said, "Hey, try our beer. It's nothing like what we wanted it to, but it's still pretty cool." And some people loved that. They loved the transparency and the honesty of it. We also got some of our very first hate mail out of that, and our very first rate beer reviews were about as negative as you could possibly get. And it started this big controversy on the bar towel about whether our beer was shitty or awesome, and it was pretty wild. And like at the time, my skin's gotten a lot thicker now, but at the time it was like, no, you don't understand. This is great. And we ended up to try to solve the issue of whether it was terrible or wonderful. We saved 1 keg for the Golden Tap Awards that year, and we didn't even have a cold room in Bankley Hill at the time. So what we had to do to keep this beer fresh, we put it in a bathtub and then just filled the bathtub with ice. And then every couple of days we'd put more ice into the bathtub to try to keep this beer fresh. Golden Taps finally rolled around, and we didn't even know that there was an award for best beer of the festival. But lo and behold, at the end of the night, we were told we'd won this award. And that gave us, in Ottawa in particular, just an incredible amount of legitimacy, because at that point there'd never been a non-Toronto brewery that had won that award. And the Golden Taps were so biased at that time that they literally they didn't have one award for best beer and one award for best brewery for the most of it. It was just best brewery in Toronto and best brewery that's not in Toronto, because they never expected a non-Toronto brewery could actually win that. So when we came back to Ottawa with that award under our belt, all of a sudden, like, this hometown pride just kind of jumped out, and restaurants were kind of calling us up left, right, and no, they weren't calling us up left, right, and center, but they'd open the doors when we showed up left, right, and center, where they didn't before that. One of the interesting things I've found with beer is that no restaurant ever picks up the phone and says, "I'd like to try your beer." You always have to bring it to them.
Yeah, marketing 101 in the beer industry.
Yeah,
Wow.
Exactly.
What a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Jen thinks you should make it again for your anniversary that way.
Oh. So about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years later, we did actually repeat that beer on purpose. And we gave it the name Haters Gonna Hate. As a nod
I remember
to all
that.
the,
yes.
Yeah, as a nod to all the rate beer trolls that told us it was terrible.
That's great. Terry and Emma want to know what's with the tractors.
What's with the tractors? Have you ever been to Bankley Kill, Terry and Emma? Once, okay. So literally the tractors drive up and down Main Street. We've got guys that drive the tractor to the local bar. When I went to high school in Bankley Kill, there's a couple kids would drive their tractors to school in the morning. And when we opened up, I really wanted to avoid pretending to be something we weren't. It was really important to me to, instead of taking, our small rural town and our, kind of family run kind of thing we were doing. And I didn't want to make it seem like it was something that it wasn't. So, if you were to call the brewery and ask for, accounts receivable, I'd be like, sorry, mom's on lunch right now. Can she call you back after? And with our logo, we really wanted to pick something that felt like it was part of Bankley Kill. And that tractor really became, the thing. And I went around town taking pictures of barns and tractors and hay wagons and fields and all sorts of things like that. But nothing really kind of had that sort of, emotional response like the tractor did. And kind of after the fact, after we'd chosen it, I'm not going to pretend like we thought of this ahead of time, but after the fact, it's kind of, we had all these extra thoughts like, well, it's a small tractor that you'd only ever find on a family run farm. And it's, the family run farm, the family run brewery, in a farming town. And it kind of all just kind of came together really nicely.
Great. Cam points out that's exactly how they do ice beer. It's wonderful that you guys did it by accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We accidentally made a German ice beer.
Before we go on, what's the next beer you'd like people to sample? I know you're not ready to go, but
well, I brought many glasses, so it's okay. I can change at any point. All right, well, let us from there move to maybe it's kind of backwards. I should have probably started with Lug Tread. Before I crack this though, has everyone already had Lug Tread? Is this not the most interesting thing to try next?
I think pretty well everyone here has had Lug Tread. So
that's good. I love it. I like the fact that everyone's tried it. We've been talking a lot about Lug Tread, so I didn't know if it might make sense to stop and do a quick tasting on Lug Tread before moving on, or if 6 beers is going to be a lot for people to get through, we can skip by Lug Tread and I'll move on to something else. What would be the preference there? Can I get hands up people that want to do a Lug Tread, and hands up people that would rather move on to something else?
I think we're going to go on to something else.
Okay. All right, then. Let's go to Good Time. All right. So maybe again, as a bit of context, when we did decide we were going to move from a portfolio of Lug Tread plus 50 rotating seasonals into a more of a balanced portfolio where we had a few beers that stayed around all year, and then still putting out seasonals, but not quite so many. We spent a lot of time trying to think what would be the best beer to kind of put out first. And who here's tried our full-time IPA? Got a few yeses there. So full-time had made its way into the full-time lineup while we were still in that kind of massive rotational program, simply because we just really liked that beer an awful lot and didn't want to see it go away. And that's actually how full-time got its name, was was we spent about a year talking about how, you know, we wanted to make this seasonal a full-time beer, and then but we never actually named it. And then when we got around to naming it, we've been calling it our full-time IPA for so long that we just said, well, I guess that'll be the name. So when it came time to make kind of the start of our next portfolio, we were just as much in love with full-time IPA, but a number of us kind of that like to have 3 or 4 beers in an evening kind of realized that, you know, at the time full-time was 6.7% alcohol, and 4 or 5 of those in an evening makes for a sloppy morning the next day. So we thought we'd give a try at making something that was a bit more on the sessionable side of things, but still kind of held that you know, big hop aroma punch, and that's how we came up with Good Time. So it is, you know, 4% alcohol. From an IBU perspective, because all the hops go in as aroma or dry hops, from a bitterness perspective, it's actually relatively low, about 25 IBUs, but, you know, quite a lot of aroma hops in there. This also finishes out really dry, so 2.2 FG. From a hops perspective, we use a lot of Nelson Sauvin and some Centennial. From a malt perspective, it's mostly pale ale malt, although we do mix in some Pilsner now. When we first came out with it, it was entirely pale ale. Now it's about half pale, half Pilsner. And then we add in a bit of Vienna malt and a little bit of wheat as well. So the wheat helps, again, lighten it up a little bit. And the Vienna kind of gives it a bit extra character to it. And then using the pale malt as well, kind of because it's such a low alcohol beer, wanted a malt that would kind of help it stand on its own, you know, with all those hops in there. Yeah, so lots of citrus and fruit notes. The mouthfeel is a little bit deceiving. It to me at least, it doesn't have a mouthfeel like a low ABV beer normally would, which makes me very happy. And you know, those Nelson Sauvin hops are just so characteristic, and you know, I think it's a bit of a love-hate for a lot of people, but if you love them, they're wonderful. If you hate them, they're kind of cat pee like.
That's very true. I enjoyed Good Time when we had it on tap at kickoff.
Yeah, it's a particularly challenging beer. We sometimes suffer from hop creep with this beer. I'm not sure if you're aware of hop creep, but because we put so much dry hops in the beer, the hops themselves kind of create an opportunity for a secondary fermentation in the keg, and that can sometimes lead to some foaming issues when it's being poured at the pub. So when you get it and it's in good condition, it's great. Every once in a while, though, that hop creep settles in, and it makes bartenders very upset because it comes out pretty foamy sometimes.
Oh, I recall that very well. Just one of those things that
My
happens.
apologies.
No need to apologize. Doing it for 20 years, I got used to, oh, well, this one's just got that issue with it.
Yeah.
A couple of things popped up. Cam mentions he had a can of Lug Tread that he left in his cellar for 4 years and found it an interesting set of flavors developed in it.
Cool.
Naomi likes to point out Lug Tread is the only beer her whole family can agree on. And
That's amazing.
Cam talks about you've done a lot of funky brews over the years, and some have been successful, and others haven't been. Bogwater's sort of one that comes to mind. He'd
Hmm.
like to know what's an example of an unexpected success and an unexpected sort of like we thought this was going to go better than it did.
Well, I mean, we obviously don't put out beers with the expectation that they're gonna totally flop. Um, but there are some that kind of go over, uh, you know, much better than we expected. And I would say maybe on that line, probably internal to Beau's, the most controversial beer we ever put out was called Double Coit. We worked with a beer researcher from the Netherlands, Ron Pattinson, and he had found this recipe from 2 years before the Bavarian Purity Act took hold, so like 1514, I guess. And we brewed that recipe, and what made that recipe so ridiculous was it was 50% oats in the mash. And for those of you that are brewers, you
Wow.
would know that kind of when you get beyond 10-15% oats in your mash, it really starts to gum up the works. So using 50%, that's 50. The whole mash tun turned to concrete basically. I think it was something like a 9-hour runoff just to get the liquid through. And then after we fermented, I went to go sample the beer, and what came out looked like a Quaker oatmeal. It was like white and gooey, and it was just disgusting. Um, and we we took the assumption that white gooey stuff was probably just at the bottom. So if we drained off enough, we'd eventually find real beer. We ended up in a 1,500 liter batch. It was 900 liters of sludge
Oh,
that had
wow.
to come out. And the beer that finally came out was, I don't know if you could use the word delicious, but it was incredibly interesting. And the brewers that worked on the beer, I think, were just so fed up with it at the time that they were like, we shouldn't put this out. We should just dump this in the sewer. And it created this big controversy in the brewery. And the way I ended up solving it, it's the only beer label that actually has my name on it. And what the beer label is it's a bit about the history of the recipe, and why I personally felt like you should try this just from a tasting history perspective. And I solved kind of the issue because the brewers were like, I don't want to put my name to it because if people don't like it, it's my reputation as much as it's the brewery's reputation at stake. And I was like, well, I believe in this strongly enough that I'm willing to put my name on it. And so we ended up putting it out, and anyone that didn't know all that backstory just thought it was like a really interesting beer. And it made the brewing team really upset because of the number of people that kept writing in saying, can you make more Double Coit? That beer is amazing. um, on the flip side, let's see. I'd say there's a beer that I really thought was going to take off, and it was a February beer, so they all sell through, but it didn't seem to get sort of the amount of excitement that I expected it would. It was called Embitterment, and it was a nice big IPA that we added mint to. And mint's a very polarizing herb, but I don't think I'd had an IPA that I'd enjoyed as much as that up to that point, because I really like the way that sort of the mint and the hops played together in that beer. But it just didn't seem to catch people's interest or creativity, or it just didn't hit for other people the way it hit for me. But that was one that I felt really strongly about, that I really liked.
I enjoyed that when it was out in the February, but
Mm,
it definitely was a polarizing beer. You either loved it or you hated it, you know?
yeah,
And so,
which is what craft beer is about, right?
yeah, that's what it should be. It's what it should be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Katie
Don't
has an
need to make
interest.
something that everyone likes.
Katie has an interesting question. She really likes your can art.
Oh yeah.
So she's curious, is it all done by the same person or is there a team of people that work on it? Different people?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do all of our artwork in-house. We don't hire an agency to do our design work for us. Over the years, there's been, I guess, a total of 4 people that have worked on design. But we I think did Jordan, who was our original creative director, did a really good job of building sort of the Beau's book for design. So he really laid out kind of a, you know, common elements and ways to use color palettes and ways to build design, so that we've been able to have multiple designers that work for us that have been able to kind of um, take that sort of the Bible of Beau's design and create something that, like, they all look very different, but they all look like they're from Beau's. And I think that's kind of the real strength to it, is that it's relatable without kind of, you know, it's always got the exact same kind of picture on it, kind of thing.
Derek has a great question, but we're fast approaching the hour. So the first thing I want to ask you, do you want to just pick another beer to talk about out of the mixed pack, Steve?
Sure, why not, eh?
Yeah.
Um, let's go with Juiced Up. Or why don't I ask, is there something someone would rather we do? I seem pretty happy with this choice.
They seem happy
Cool.
with it. I'd go with it.
All right. All right. So again, you asked earlier about when we follow trends and when we lead on trends. I would say we're followers on this one, but happy followers. The sort of the Northeast IPA. We're fortunate enough to live about 3 hours from the Alchemist. So we kind of have a pretty steady stock of Heady Topper hanging around at the brewery. And when Flying Monkeys came out with their hazy IPA, it was truly impressive how well that beer did, and how much excitement it got. And so we kind of kicked ourselves in the ass for not moving on that style earlier, and said, you know what, let's hope there's room for another one out there, because this is a really fun style to make. What we did to kind of make it our own was instead of going sort of the 7-8%, we went for the sessionable again on this. So we really dropped the ABV down. You'll notice the current batch is not nearly as hazy as it should be. This is probably saying stuff I'm not supposed to say, but during the sort of the COVID crisis, we had an issue with Diastaticus yeast getting into some of our fermenters. And Diastaticus yeast, for those that don't know, it's a yeast, but it's not a friendly yeast, and it can create off flavors if it's there too long. So as a precaution to avoid sort of off flavors developing, we've had to filter some of our beers that we ordinarily wouldn't. So it's not got the haze that I'd prefer to see in it, but it does keep the beer tasting better for everybody. So kind of had to make a bit of a compromise on this batch. I'm assuming we're all drinking the same batch. Maybe yours is perfectly hazy and I could have just been quiet about it. I don't know. All looking pretty clear there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the hops on this that make this beer so special, Citra and Simcoe. Again, it's only 4.5% alcohol, so still really low for sort of a Northeast style. Which is why we don't call it a New England IPA. We call it a New England Pale Ale. Trying to make sure that we keep our naming conventions authentic and truthful. Yeah, it's this is a beer that's all about the aroma hops. Lots of just big citrus, tropical, fruity notes, and then the Simcoe just has this really kind of nice dankness to it. So you get kind of these bright citrusy aromas, and then this kind of like dank, almost cannabis kind of aroma coming from the Simcoe hops as well. And yeah, I like it.
Sounds interesting. Hey, Derek was wondering what's the inspiration behind the Halcyon and why the decision to launch as a separate brand from Beau's?
Yeah, so I guess the genesis of Halcyon was we had a very talented brewer at our place named Bryce, and he came and told me he was going to start his own brewery one day, and I was super excited for him, and decided I was gonna help him out with the project. So I gave him some help with the business plan and was helping him kind of develop it. One of the things that he'd been unaware of was that his original model for the brewery was going to be like Cascade Barrel House. I don't know if you've ever been there in Portland, but they don't actually brew their own beer. They get someone else to brew the beer for them, and they take over as soon as it comes in. So they ferment it in barrels, age it in barrels, and it's not about the starting beer. It's about what they can do with the barrels that makes that brewery so special. So he was going to follow a very similar program. Was unaware that Ontario had this obscure law that said if you're going to have a retail store, you have to do every step of the brewing process in-house. And they literally define it down to like, you have to mash it, you have to boil it, you have to, like, every step is listed. And if you don't do any single one of those steps, you can't have your own retail store. And most of what he wanted to do was sell out of his retail store. So he went back to his investors and said, sorry, we've got this issue. We're going to have to now pay an extra $500,000 or whatever for a brew house. And his investors backed out at that point. At that point, I was kind of so in love with the project that I said, well, shit, how about we just fold it into what we're doing here, and you can run it. And so that's why it has a different name, is because that's what he was going to call his brewery. He actually ended up leaving the brewery about 6 months ago. So he's kind of left us without without a brewery. Just 1 second. I've got a kid waving at me here. Hey Viv, what's up? Oh, okay. So he we're quite fortunate that he'd been training an apprentice since day one, and so Dave Al, who had been apprenticing under him for, I guess, 3 or 4 years beforehand, has now taken over the reins. But that's why it kind of got started, and that's why it has its own sort of separate identity. And now that that's kind of no longer as much of it, we kind of think of it as like a pendulum that, we had it kind of swung all the way to one side where, you know, you almost had to be an investigative journalist to know it's from Beau's. The other way that you could have swung the pendulum was to just like full on make it a Beau's product. And so what we're trying to do now is just kind of shift the pendulum a little bit closer. Kind of like the fact that it's got its own identity. It's a very different way of making beer. And, you know, someone that is a hardcore lug tread fan might really enjoy these beers, but they might also be just completely surprised or shocked that it's the same brewery putting it out. So by giving it a different name, we kind of set a different set of expectations, I think, for people. But you know, the intent was never to hide the fact that it was from Beau's, and it always said, you know, part of the Beau's family kind of on the side. But we kind of recognize that not a lot of people who probably would try it if they knew it was Beau's knew it was Beau's. So we'd kind of like to get more people to try it, but we'd like to keep the name a little bit separate so that we don't set people up that it's got, you know, with the expectation that it's gonna, you know, taste like a lug tread or something like that.
We're approaching that hour point, and I said I would nudge you and go, Steve, do you still have time to talk to us? I know you've got commitments with a new daughter and a young family. So
I'm having fun. So if we can maybe wrap up like 9:15, if that's
absolutely
fair.
no problem. I have a couple more questions that I want to ask, and we'll wrap it up by 15 minutes after, okay?
Okay, cool.
So what do you see happening in the industry that's exciting right now?
There's a lot that's exciting. Let me just check. I'm trying to remember the name of, no, I didn't get a response back. I was out in BC just before the crisis, and there's these 3 or 4 breweries that are all located on the same street, and they're doing this really cool thing. And I've been racking my brain all day to trying to remember the name of this brewery, and I can't, the name of the breweries. But they each have their own breweries. They're completely independent of each other, but they've decided to kind of, in the external world, market themselves as one group. So you can go to like pretty much any pub in Victoria or Vancouver, and they'll have a rotating tap from this group of breweries. And one time it'll be one brewery, one time it'll be the next. So you kind of have like these 3 or 4 breweries that have all banded together to kind of market and sell themselves, not as an individual brewery, but as a collective of breweries. And it's really cool. I'm also I'll say a big fan of Nick. So the Beer Lab stuff is pretty exciting to me. I've known Nick for many years, and he's a talented brewer and a really great guy. So kind of been watching that project with a lot of excitement. And one of my buddies from high school is just in the process of opening his new brewery called Red Tape Brewing in Toronto. So that's kind of another really exciting thing for me. I am finding it hard to discover new beer since the world went to shit. And so I'm not sampling or trying nearly as much as I used to, which I guess it's on me. But for me, I always liked trying new things when I traveled. So that was kind of part of my exploration for craft beer was every time I was in a different town, I'd hunt out the local beer scene. And since COVID's hit, I haven't really replaced that habit with something else where I'm, either buying online or doing something else. And it could be because I've got, an entire brewery full of beer. that maybe has made me lazy. But I am missing the experience of trying new beer where I go right now.
Okay. I'm not going to run through your bio or the accomplishments from Beau's. I mean, you have numerous awards, numerous accolades. I will read a short piece of the bio, and that is you've shared beer with 3 prime ministers, 2 premiers, a governor general. I've been privileged to make beer with Margaret Atwood, Tom Green in a monastery in the Netherlands, and presented beer to a couple of princesses. I want to add to that, you've got a world-class microbrew. You've got a young family, which you just added in addition to. What's next for Steve?
What's next for Steve? Well, I'm still quite active with my band. I mentioned earlier I'm an old school punk rocker, and I'm still doing that. So Audio Visceral's the name of my band. We put out an EP earlier this year. Got demos already recorded for next full release coming out hopefully next year. So that kind of my other passion, and that, you know, between that and the kids, that's probably going to be my life outside of the brewery for probably the next very long time. It's you know, there's lots of things I'd love to try, and lots of things I'd love to do, but realistically, the brewery keeps me busy night and day, and then when I do find some extra time, it's either devoted to the family or to music.
I can totally appreciate that. There's a couple of questions I've got to go back to. Katie wants to know if Sticky Cow Barbecue across the street from you is any good.
They are, and they're attached to a little cider company as well. So definitely worth checking them out. We don't have a full on-site restaurant at the brewery, but we do have a company called Meetings that comes in and does somewhat similar food on our patio. But I would wholly recommend you pop by both spots and try them both out. The Sticky Cow guys are great there. They live in town, and yeah, it's good stuff.
Thank you. And Terry and Emma, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong probably, but is there going to be a return to Le Coeur Noir? Or is
So that was a pro-am that we did with Reinhard before Reinhard Brewing was a thing. And he's just an awesome guy, and that beer is absolutely amazing. With all of our collaborative beers, when we bring them back, we make sure that our collaborator is still cool with us doing it. But we have brought that one back a few times, and I'd like to think he'd still be happy for us to put that out again. So I'm gonna say I hope so.
I hear you. I have, out of all the questions I wanted to ask, I'm going to ask my last one.
Okay.
What one thing would you like everyone who joined in tonight to our tasting and chat, what one thing would you like them to take away from this?
Oh my goodness. I just hope everyone had a good time, and I don't know. I find it weird to think you've all sat there listening to me. Can I turn the question around and say, you know, what would you like me to take away from the call?
I think take away from the call is that we all found you totally engaging and love what Beau's is doing. Enjoy the beer. People who have gone there have totally enjoyed the experience. Personally, from me, Beau's was always my favorite brewery to work with at kickoff. You know, awesome. You guys gave us all kinds of support all through the years. And
but you got to work with Keith though, so yes, you obviously were getting the best of the bunch too, right?
Unfortunately for you.
Well, I've always believed that, yes. So, I know there's a whole bunch of other questions, and I know you've got time pressures. So I'm actually going to wrap it up now. Steve, from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you for taking this time to share with all of us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay, and I hope
Good to see.
you will join us again sometime in the future. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to come back and chat some more. And fingers crossed. Not too much more time. We'll get to all do this in person somewhere.
absolutely, absolutely. Everybody, thank you, Steve, for going in and joining us tonight. Absolutely love your beers. And remind everybody next week, Graham Spence, Block 3 is back on. I'll be firing off an email later tonight with the beers that he's chosen. And again, Steve, all the best. And congratulations on the new addition to the family. And we will chat again.
All right.
And
cheers. Bye, everybody.
I'm going to take the recording off, and you guys can socialize for a bit if you want. Bye, Steve.
Bye.